everybody, and welcome back to the channel. As you can see, on location at the Autumn Property Investor Show, and I'm delighted to finally catch up with industry commentator Russell Quirk. And Russell, I've been so looking forward to eventually getting around to interview you, because you're somebody whose opinion I've really come to respect over the last few years.
You're the one.
So it's lovely to have you on Property Tribes TV.
Thank you.
I love your take on everything and your critical thinking and analysis of the market, and you actually feel it's quite positive at the moment, don't you?
Property market wise, yeah, I do. I mean, certainly in the short to medium term, I think. I think that obviously we've had a change of government, we've got a budget that, as we record this, is 6 weeks away. But I think the economy actually is kind of in a reasonable shape. When I say the economy, I don't mean the kind of the fiscal kind of black hole politics stuff. Well, yeah, I guess what you'd call the kind of the fiscal economy. I think, look, let's leave that to the politicians, I think. Whether that has an implication on the retail economy or not, I don't know, we don't know. But I guess how I see it, and as you've alluded to, I always just try and speak my mind. I just tell it how it is. I think that the way that the economy has been recovering over the last few months, on the basis that inflation's under control, therefore interest rates have started to drop, and actually fixed rates, so mortgage rates, I mean, even more beneficial, if you like, even more attractive than the bank base rate. There's obviously talk as we record this that the bank base rate will reduce from its 5% even further, maybe once, maybe even twice before the end of the year, so that's very positive. So I think that's providing a lot of very enthusiastic sentiment for the market. But the other fundamentals, of course, are that unemployment is almost non-existent, 4% and a bit unemployment, and wage growth is really positive. I mean, it's still running at about 5%. So without getting too kind of geeky about the numbers themselves, which I know can get a bit boring, when you look at affordability, which I think really drives the property market, and that sentiment around affordability, yeah, I think we're in a good place, and I think we will be for a little while. Anyone, by the way, I think that can predict the housing market or the economy kind of more than 12 months forward is fibbing, frankly, because you can't. You can't. I mean, who knows what's going to happen politically, geopolitically, but I think, for buy-to-let investors, for landlords, and for, the consumer property purchaser, on the basis that house prices are kind of flattish, maybe up a little bit over the last 12 months. Nationwide are saying 4%, which is pretty healthy. It's a good environment to now consider jumping in, particularly for those that have been waiting, because certain figures in our industry, you know who I mean, have been saying, oh, the market's going to crash, don't buy anything because the housing market's going to drop 20%, 30%. Those of us that are sensible and have seen all this kind of happen before know that that is not going to happen. Sometimes we get this kind of undulation in the property market, but if you look at what the market's done since Brexit was announced, for instance, which was kind of that big kind of black swan moment, the housing market's the average property price is £70,000 higher, despite the fact we had Andrew Bailey from the Bank of England, Mark Carney before that, George Osborne way before that, all saying that the housing market was going to suffer because of those headwinds. It just simply hasn't happened, and nor will it.
Well, indeed, and for landlords and thinking about rental yields, we've got absolutely incredible tenant demand, which is forcing up rents. I don't know how sustainable that is, but that's as a result of government policies for sure. But or lack of. But there are reasons for landlords to stay in the sector. A lot of landlords feel uncertainty, and one of the things that is causing uncertainty is the budget. And again, it's so dangerous, I think, to listen to the media and all the hype around it, because it's all just eyeball clicks, isn't it?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the budget? Some people are saying, oh, I'm not going to do anything until after the budget.
I guess I kind of understand that. It is probably the most important budget that we've seen, for 14 years. It's the first Labour budget for 14 years. I think
and the first by a woman.
Yeah, no, indeed. What Rachel Reeves is going to do, who knows? It's being trailed, of course, that there's going to be an increase in capital gains tax. There might be a further assault on landlords, and of course landlords have, from a regulatory point of view, and I guess from a taxation point of view over the last 2 or 3 years, they've suffered a bit. I agree with you, I still think it's a good place, so it might not be as rosy and wonderful being a landlord as it was maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago. But given those yields that you talk about, and rents up 5, 6, 7, 8% per annum, now a bit of capital appreciation, reducing cost, particularly if you're on a variable rate buy-to-let mortgage now, all of that stuff's pretty positive. I think what Rachel Reeves will probably do, she will hit the rich, whatever that means. I mean, depends on your definition of rich, I suppose. But I think she'll hit those that are high earners. And I think actually the big thing to worry about as a landlord is if you're thinking of getting out of the sector, you're almost undoubtedly going to be hit by an increase in capital gains tax. So my message would be, look, suck it up, don't sell, because you're going to pay a taxation amount that's higher on your profit on your buy-to-let property because you think that being a landlord is not a good place to be anymore. And I would contend that it's still okay, to kind of stick in there really. Particularly as interest rates are going to continue to reduce and rents are going to continue to increase. So just stick at it.
You said before we started the camera going that you feel there's almost like a two-tier economy.
Yeah.
Could you explain what you mean by that? Because I think it's interesting for the viewers.
Yeah, I just think we see in the media talk about £22 billion black holes, deficits, and the balancing of the economy from a pure politics point of view. And I guess I'm not an economist, so I'm not an expert, but I think much of that stuff doesn't affect the average woman and man in the street, the average landlord. And I think that the main thing in our space is perception in terms of what the property market's going to do. Yes, as a landlord, I guess you've also got to worry about the regulatory framework, so the right to rent, the renters' rights
bill,
as it's now being called. Yep. So of course that may have an implication. But in terms of interest rates, so the cost of money, and people's affordability, so their ability to pay the rent, even if it is increasing, and as a buyer, the ability to get a mortgage and to service that mortgage, and the fact that you hopefully can be fairly confident you're going to have a job in 6, 12, 18 months' time, they are the fundamental things in what I call the retail economy that I think are more important. So I don't think we should get too hung up by kind of Daily Telegraph and Daily Mirror headlines about black holes, particularly, just to be political for a second, that black hole seems to exist, and then that same amount of money seems to get spent on vanity projects all over the place by the government anyway. And I don't just mean this government, they're all as bad as each other, whatever colour they are. So I don't think we should get too hung up by that. The main thing is, our interest rates on the way down, our borrowing costs are going to become more affordable, and the answer to those two questions is yes. So I think we can actually have some comfort, even though, yes, as a landlord at the end of October, in that budget, that there might be a little bit of frustration, shall we say, but I don't think it stops the asset and the sector being as attractive as I believe it still is.
Yes, because property is a long-term investment, and I don't think it's a good idea to make kind of knee-jerk decisions on things that are relatively short-term. We may not have a Labour government in 4 years' time, so... I
couldn't possibly comment. It's looking a bit unlikely, though. I think we all get obsessed by monthly property price indexes and, watching to see what, therefore, our properties might be worth, which is a bit academic, isn't it, on the basis that, there's huge regional variations, and ultimately, as you say, yes, I mean, really, being a landlord is what, a 10-year endeavour, a 15 or 20-year endeavour?
Yeah, easily.
But the other thing I'd say, though, if you're a landlord thinking about not being in the sector anymore because of a little bit of pressure from a new government, well, where else are you going to put your money? What else are you going to do? You're going to stick it in the stock market? Well, I wouldn't do that right now, because I suspect that that's very vulnerable, very volatile. Same with currencies, same with metals. You can invest in startups where you can potentially get a nice big return, but they're very high risk. I mean, I know we're a bit biased here, Vanessa, but I genuinely struggle to think of anything that is as safe and certain in the long term in terms of capital growth and yield than being a landlord. Seriously.
Well, I agree with you, and the fundamentals that underpin property investment, they remain the same. They haven't changed since I started building a portfolio in 2004. So I always look to the fundamentals to remind myself. You mentioned the Renters' Rights Bill. Many landlords obviously very focused on the removal of Section 21. It is concerning. We are lacking in some detail. What are your thoughts on landlords feeling wobbly over that?
I honestly think they'll get over it. I hate to say, like they did Section 24, lots of other things. Is Section 21, as in unfair evictions, is it is it a fantastical thing in terms of it not really solving a problem, given that most tenancies end because the tenant ends them? I mean, that's a fact,
it's
the majority.
True. 92%, I believe.
There you go, 92% of tenancies are ended because the tenant ends them. I think the government have got, this one and the one before, have got too mixed up in playing into the crowd, that crowd being tenants that are voters. But I think we are where we are. Angela Rayner is certainly determined to push it through. So I think we're going to have to live with the fact that you won't be able to evict after the expiry of your assured short-hold tenancy agreement as such. I guess probably a bigger concern is the muted part of that Renter Rights Act, which is going to be that the tenant can give notice at any time in the first 2 months. I know people like yourself, Ben Beadle and others are lobbying government to say, look, come on, we have to have some certainty here as a landlord.
Russell, I thought they wanted certainty for tenants, and now they've banned fixed terms.
Well,
so surely they should be allowing a 3-year term or a 5-year term.
I think they should allow any term. I think landlord versus tenant should be able to come up with any deal they want, bake in every year maybe an increase based on RPI or CPI. But if you're a tenant and you as a landlord are happy to have a relationship for 10 years, maybe with a break every 2 or 5, whatever, that shouldn't be anything to do with government, I don't think. And I go back to the point, unfair evictions are just, they're a nonsense. They don't really exist. They only exist outside the scope of an AST. So I think this is massive overreach. But I also think that where we are saved, I suppose, is that we're always going to be in a situation where there are more tenants than properties, and as a consequence the market will demand that there's a very strong financial argument to still be a landlord, despite the fact that yes, the legislation perhaps might be a little bit more weighted in favour of the tenant now rather than the landlord. But I don't think in the scheme of things it's a particularly big deal. I suppose if we put the shoe on the other foot, think about it from a tenant's perspective. How many tenants are going to go through the rigmarole of moving their kids' school, changing all their bills, the moving process itself, to then want to move out after 2 months? I mean, maybe it's an academic issue. So, the fundamentals, as you call them, of being a landlord, I think are still very solid and, dictate that being a landlord is still a good place to be.
Oh, well, just final question then, because I know you've got to rush off and do some speaking. Do you have any tips for landlords to navigate the stormy waters ahead of the Renters' Rights Bill? Get educated.
Get educated. My biggest bugbear with landlords is the vanity of where they want to buy their properties. So I live in a place called Brentwood in Essex, and there's loads and loads of landlords there, but it actually doesn't produce a fantastic yield for whatever reason. And I talk to a lot of landlords that say, yeah, but I know it and it's safe. I think there needs to be more open-mindedness from the point of view of landlords to go to other places where they might not know the area, but where the yields are higher. If you're going to go put money or a mortgage into a property, yes, it's tempting to do that because it's 5 miles up the road or 2 miles up the road. But I think yields, particularly outside the southeast, are so much more attractive that so many southeast landlords don't want to venture out their comfort zone. So that would be my tip. Have a look elsewhere, because I think you'll find that your yield could be a lot more than you are currently getting, perhaps.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us
Pleasure.
Here on Property Tribes TV.
Good to see you.
Lovely to catch up with you eventually, at last. And I do advise everybody to check out Russell's work across the social web. You're on Talk TV, is it Talk Radio?
Yeah, Talk TV, Talk Radio, on Twitter, at Russell Quirk, so if you want to argue with me, as many people seem to want to do, or indeed on LinkedIn as well, so I'm easy to find.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank
you.